a podcast about podcasting? What's up, guys? Marshall here, and I promise we haven't lost our minds, okay? We put together today's episode because, quite frankly, we get asked questions all the time about the behind the scenes processes of putting this podcast together. So we figured it was time for us to come together and lay it all out on the line. So if you're someone who's considering your own podcast, but you just aren't sure about the time commitment or the financial commitment or the energy commitment that it takes to make it run, after today, you won't be unsure anymore. Welcome to episode 100 of the Serial Progress Seeker podcast. Let's go.
Welcome to the Serial Progress Seeker podcast, where we share blueprints for building an unconventional life. Each week, we conduct expert interviews, talk strategies, and share advice for escaping the 9-to-5 and building a life where you are free to do what you want, when you want, with whom you want, all while making an excellent living. Okay, Serial Progress Seekers, let's get started with the show.
Guys, this is exciting. This is a big day. We are now recording our 100th episode of the Serial Progress Seeker. I agree, Ben. This is like a nice little golf clap moment, right? Doesn't this feel good? We are now at triple digits. Ben, I'm going to turn it right over to you because you are the originator of this whole thing. This started when it was just you talking into a microphone. Tell me about how it feels to be at 100 episode. What does that mean to you, man?
Anybody that's ever recorded a podcast, you get really excited about it when you haven't done it yet. You have all these good ideas of what you want to talk about and like how it's going to affect the world. And then you get like 2 episodes in and you realize the amount of work that it takes to do this, and thinking that you're going to get to 100 of them. It's very, very difficult to wrap your head around that. And I'll just say this: it's an accomplishment for us to celebrate because of the difficulty that it is to get something that impacts people produced on a weekly basis. For those of you that have followed the podcast for a long time, you realize that the consistency thing was not something that I was good at on my own. And it's because I'm doing other things, like the things that I come back here and talk about is, that's the stuff that's actually taking my time up. And so to get to this stage, it's an incredible thing for us because we do feel like we've got this down, to a science. That's not to say that we don't have lots of things that we want to improve, but in terms of like how we actually structure this, it took a long time for us to get it here. And, that speaks to you guys, not to me, because obviously, as I said, anybody that's listened to this realized when I was in charge of this podcast, consistency was not our strength. So for us to be at 100 episodes, that is something that I'm extremely proud of. And, I just want to say this. One of the things that we're also extremely proud of is in the last few weeks, we've been paying very special attention to our listener stats. And, what we are finding in our listener stats, especially in this last run of podcasts that we've been putting out, is that the vast majority of people that when they actually like start listening to the podcast, they make it all the way to the end. And that's something that I think, as somebody that puts together a podcast, somebody that listens to a lot of podcasts, that's not the case with a lot of podcasts. It takes some sort of special sauce, something magical, not only to have a podcast that comes out every week, but one that people are actually listening to all the way to the end, the vast majority. And so, yes, you all listening to this, we can't see you individually, but we can see the stats of all the people that listen to the podcast, how many people actually make it all the way through. And our numbers are very, very good. So you put those two things together with both us hitting 100th episode and really starting to hit our stride with people are actually continuing to listen all the way through. We must be saying something that's useful to you all. Something to celebrate. So, I'm going to do my best not to be, sappy and emotional about this. But this is something that, I have a lot to say about why we do this podcast and where we think it fits in, what the strategy is behind it for our business. But to get here to this point was no small feat. And that is a compliment to everybody that is on this call today, this podcast, everybody that is listening. but also to a group of people that are behind the scenes working that you never hear their voices on this podcast. And so hopefully we'll get to give them some props as we go through today, because we got something really interesting to talk about. And I'll let you sort of talk about that, Marshall.
Yeah, you touched on it right there, man. You touched on the why. What's the reason that we get together once a week and sit down and rap about all sorts of different things. And I think some people are probably interested in knowing the why. Why did we decide to do this? So before we get into our day to day, which is the reason we're going to actually get into this discussion today, we should probably get into that why and talk about that. So with an established brand already in place, that Serial Progress Seeker already had in place, rocking and rolling for quite a while. Why did Serial Progress Seeker decide to start a weekly podcast? What was the reasoning there?
So it started off as something pretty simple. I have, an incredible group of friends, an incredible group of acquaintances that I enjoy being around. Just a lot of people that I think are great people. And they sort of know that I was a chiropractor for a while. And then all of a sudden, had this big online business. Like it went from, I had a local business into something that was just this, really, really profitable / machine that, that nobody really seems to understand what I'm doing, or how I got here. And so Serial Progress Seeker, started out, and the podcast specifically started out as I would get all these questions from people who are like, well, how did you transition out of, a desk job, or how did you transition from being, in a clinic, or from this? And we're kind of doing the traditional thing that we all think that we've got to do, or at least our generation thought we had to do. How did you get from there to whatever the heck you're doing right now? And so I started collecting these questions, and as I would have these discussions with people, and we would be talking over dinner, or, just casually when I would meet somebody, when I was out on a trip or something, they would not only ask questions about how I got from there to here. They would ask questions about specifics. Well, I have this kind of business. How do I do this? How do I get more people through the door? Or how do I not have to go to the office as much? How can I start my own business from home that maybe becomes my thing? And it would get more and more specific. And so what actually ended up happening was I was getting these questions over and over enough that I wanted to have something that I could be like, well, I actually did a podcast on this, and let's just go listen to this episode. And I wanted to have this running library of, when I was getting a question, I could go in and really just point somebody to something. And, we could have the conversation. I wouldn't mind talking about it, but I was like a place where I really got to think about it and sit down and talk about it. And so it really became kind of an FAQ. Frequently asked questions. That's what this podcast really started off as the beginning. It was like a running, updated FAQ of what people were asking me, because especially after the pandemic, you guys, I had so many people that were like, I'm sick of going to work. I realized I don't have to anymore, and they're asking me to come back, and I don't want to. And how can I get from here to where I am to where you are, with sort of running a business on my own, because I think I can do it. I think I'm talented, and everybody that usually says that is the people that I talk to a lot of smart people. But having that FAQ, that's what this started out as, and then it kind of became sort of this really front facing thing. A lot of the people that power our company, that are our customers, they're very invested. They buy lots of things from us that's like information products or software. And I have this really great ongoing relationship where I talk to these people almost every week. And it's such a rewarding thing for me to get to do that. But you start to realize there's this whole group of people that are just like those people, or people that want to do very similar things, that have no idea that you exist. You don't have that relationship. And this podcast started to become the front-facing part of our company, that somebody that was kind of interested but didn't know if, how all things, that they didn't want to buy something right out of the gate. That was a little, is this for me? I'm not sure. The podcast has become something that it really showcases what can happen. And what you can do, but without you having to buy something from us. And we've got lots of really, really good things that are in depth, actually see it work behind the scenes. Here is the step-by-step that you pay for. But you have to kind of get into that mode. You have to sort of get farther down the road to be into that. And we didn't want to just kind of hold all this good stuff that we had just to that small group of people. And so the podcast turned into this thing where, we could really give people a lot of stuff that they could act on without having to buy anything from us and see some significant change in their lives, just by listening to the podcast. And as things have sort of progressed, that's the idea behind it. Is we're every week we're reaching more and more people with this podcast, and we're starting to see sort of this groundswell of people really getting it. And so what started off as an FAQ turned into sort of, accidentally this front-facing thing. And when I say accidentally, I mean I started to see it happening, and I was like, well, we should run with this because this is something people are into. And it's turned into this thing where, we have people that listen to us every single week from all over the world. We have stats on that too. And they listen to us all the way through. And when you start to see those things happen, you realize the importance of showing up. And I think that's what it's all about. It's gone from this thing that we felt like we wanted to kind of make sure we did, to this thing that we feel like if we don't show up and do it, that we're letting a lot of people down. And so that's it. It's, it has become sort of the face of Serial Progress Seeker, which is a software / information company. It's become the face of that company. But I think the most important part for me is, and this is just what's so great, is anywhere I am at any time, I can reference back to one of our episodes and point it at someone and say, go listen to this because I think this is the answer that you're looking for when you're asking me these questions. And that's incredibly handy. And so right now at 100 episodes, that's where this stands for me. I'm sure when we get to 150, 200, 500 episodes, that will have, morphed into something else. I'm sure it'll keep some of this, but that's where we are right now. And, I'm pretty proud of what this is, because for a lot of people right now, I'm starting to get those messages or people are saying, man, I listened to the podcast and I never really thought about this that way. And, yeah, it's changing trajectories. And then some people that had that conversation with me a year ago, where they are now a year later because of that, you can't ignore it. You're seeing people that are actually taking the jump, and the difference, you can track back. You can literally go to their social profile. So you can look at pictures of them when they were stuck in that cycle of sort of the traditional, versus when they had built their own things, which to me is more stress when you start building your own things, right? It actually is more stress. All of us that have built their own things know it's more stress. But the change in demeanor that they have, even with more stress on top of them, because they're doing what they love and they're doing it for themselves and for their families, that's pretty powerful. So that's where it stands right now. That's why we do it. And, something's happening. And I don't really know how to explain what's happening yet. I'm hoping in the next, few months, I'll be able to understand what's happening behind the scenes with all this, but with the listeners, with what we're doing, something special is happening. And I'm just excited to see where this goes next.
Yeah, man, it's a fun ride to be on, right? It's really cool. And I can remember at the very beginning of you and I talking about working together on this podcast, and I can remember you telling me some very specific things about how so many podcasts in the world don't make it to 10 episodes and 20 episodes. And then all of a sudden, the ones that make it to 100 episodes are so few that you're starting to get into like that rarefied air that we talk about, right? And it's that's what makes me so proud to be kind of where we are and what we're doing. But as we talk about specifically about the production of the podcast, there was one thing that as we start to get into this, and I'm going to pass it over to you to kind of lead us through this conversation, because it's going to be a really interesting one. But I think it's really important that we acknowledge right out of the gate that to be producers of a decent podcast, we all have to be consumers first, right? And that's something that we all buy into quite a bit, because we talk about it all the time. We talk about Tabitha just posted in our group today about a podcast she listened to, and the other day I came across a TikTok that I saw and wanted to share, and so we're constantly sharing information amongst ourselves. And to be honest, I feel like any good podcast or any good creator of any sort needs to be a consumer first. And that's why we're out there watching podcasts. We're watching, TikTok videos, YouTube videos, other influencers, just to draw inspiration all the time. And I know that you guys probably feel the same way, but that's as we get into production, I felt like it was so important for us to start with that caveat that we start as consumers.
Yeah. And I want Tabitha's thought on this too, because I think this is really interesting. Tabitha's done a lot of podcasting, as well as I have, before we even got into this. And I look at this as like a band, and I have a lot of experience with bands, good and bad. But the best bands start off typically like this. There's one person that is pushing things. Like they have their vision and they bring in other people, and the other people see that vision of that one person and they're like, cool, I want to be a part of that. I want to do that. And then what happens with the best bands? Like this is not every band, but the best bands out there get into this really interesting sort of competitive nature, not just within the band, but with other bands, right? And so what has happened over the last little bit is like, this was sort of my thing when I started, and I asked you guys to come in, and I think you guys saw what we were trying to do with this at the time. And when you guys started becoming involved, at first, I think you were kind of trying to be like, okay, well, this is what Ben wants. And how do we give Ben what he wants? I think that was the beginning. And so I really appreciate that. But what I think it started to come into is like, what do you want out of it? And so like there's stuff that you guys, as Marshall was saying, we go look at what a lot of other people are doing, and I think all of us get that, and they're like, why are we not doing that? Why are we not doing this thing? And so we push it, and then like one of us has to go figure, whoever's slot it is that fits into has to go figure it out. And so that's what's really interesting to me is sort of, we have been fully aware the entire time we've been doing this podcast together that we weren't where we wanted to be. We weren't really ready, even though we were doing it live in front of people. There's so many things from content to how we do this, how we talk back and forth, to editing, that we weren't where we wanted to be. And, it's taken months for us to start to get to the place where we're like, okay, we're starting to really hit something. Everybody's pushing everybody every single week to get there. And I think that's what's so interesting. And like I said, Tab, I want to hear your thoughts on this. And I think it's really interesting to watch what's happened over the last little bit, because it is hard to get to 100, but what has really sort of gotten us to a place to where this has become easy, and we'll discuss the whole process of how this works in a minute, but it's been a constant push from different sides, from different people, that have become a part of this, whether it's one of the three of us or it's Ashton, it's Alicia. Everybody's pushing this because they want it to turn into something that they want it to turn into. And all that blending of ideas turns into something. So Tab, thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I love, one, when I came on board, I'm like, yay, I get to be the woman's perspective in this because, a bunch of dudes. So you needed at least one girl in here. But even even talking about like being consumers of other podcasts and things like that, I know you automatically think, okay, well, that's other podcasts that are like ours. I'm not necessarily that person. I'm that person that will go, being the girl, listen to the murder podcast, but seeing how they do things and how that can apply to ours, even though they're completely different niches, being able to take all of that different content and twist it and warp it to where it can be something beautiful for us. And I think that's exactly like you said, each one of us brings something different. And yeah.
No, I think that's the thing, is it's like we have been very aware that we are failing in public through this entire process. We have we didn't wait to have something right. We kept putting out, over especially the last, 6 months, we have continued to put out content and go back and listen to the content and say, what's wrong with this? What do we not like? From tiny things to big things. Sometimes it was like, well, is this boring? Sometimes that's the question, is what we're doing boring? And then sometimes it's as much as, hey, does the music in the intro match the audio of when we're talking from levels? It's like from the biggest thing to the smallest things we have been tweaking. And I'll be the first person to say that episode 100, we definitely don't have it figured out. There's still things that I'll go back and listen to, like, we could have done better there. But we'll get them next week.
I feel like we'll still feel that way at episode 5,000. Oh, there's still something we could do better.
I think so. But I think that's the thing. And so we really wanted to do something special with this episode in that we wanted to give a documentary, if you will, of what our process looks like right now. Before I get into that, I need to sort of tell you what the process was before the full team was involved. This podcast was just me for a while. And I would sit down, come up with the idea. I would sit down and record myself talking through the idea and talking about the topic that I wanted to. I would go edit it. I would, once I was done editing, I would master it, and then I would push it live, and then I would be the person that promoted it, and then start all over again. And that was me, and that was why it was so difficult, because that was like I would do that on top of all the other stuff that I was already doing, and wasn't sustainable for me. It just was not sustainable. As much as I loved the podcast, as much as I thought it was making an impact in the world, because people were telling me it was making an impact in their lives, I could not get it done. And so we had to start building systems to make sure that we were putting out good stuff, but on a consistent basis. And this episode 100 of the Serial Progress Seeker podcast, is going to be 100% about how we actually do this every week right now. Now, 50 episodes down the line, this could be very different. But right now, we want to kind of go through and talk about every week, what do we do? What do we do that actually gets this thing out the door? And so my first question, and I'm going to be, I get to ask the questions this time. Usually Marshall, Tabitha get to ask the questions, but I get to ask the questions this time, because just so everybody knows, what typically happens every single week is I show up on a Thursday, and they have given me a rundown of topics. We have approved topics. We'll go through the full list of how this works. But what usually happens is I look at my stuff, I show up, and I just talk. And it's awesome. It's so awesome. It's completely different than when I used to do this by myself. I get to show up and I just talk. And I get to sort of flex the expertise on the marketing, the digital marketing side that I have learned over the last little bit. They set me up for that. And that works. But there's a lot of other things that go into this. So my first question for you guys is, and I think a lot of people wonder this. My first question is this: how ahead are we typically with our episode recording? Meaning, from the time something gets recorded, how long is it until it sees the actual light of day? And I think a lot of people are, when I listen to a podcast, I wonder that, like, how ahead are they? Is this like recorded the week before? Is this recorded the day before? I used to have some podcasts that were recorded the day before. How ahead is this actually done? So, that's my first question. I think everybody would want to know how far ahead on average are we right now at episode 100 of where we record to what goes live?
It's funny that you asked this. I was actually just listening to a podcast the other day where I literally heard a guy say, "Oh, by the time this goes live, this announcement will have already been made." And I was like, I recognize that, because we're the same way. We work ahead. In a grand world, we would be anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks ahead. Literally right now we're recording one that is not going to go live for another 5 or 6 weeks, I think. So I think in a general sense, we like to be anywhere from that 4 to 6 week range. If things go my way and how we have it set up, then we make sure that we're not anywhere in that 4-week window.
Right. Well, and anybody that knows the history of the show, and we'd have to point back to the actual episode where we talk about this, because I can't remember which episode this was. There was a point where I got hurt. I broke my nose, my hands didn't work, and I was bloody and beaten. Nobody beat me up, by the way. I just fell because I'm clumsy. But I was beat up, and I had to take work off of work for a month. And there was no gap. There was no gap in the pods. Like, the pods continued. The pods did what they were supposed to do. We did a pretty good job of keeping up because of that. But there is the just what if Ben breaks his nose window.
And for reference, that was episode 78. So think about that. Here we are. We're recording number 100. So that's pretty impressive.
Nice. Well, and yeah. So, but yeah. So that, I think that's fascinating. And for us, I think the idea is we do like to have that month window, at least. At the very least, that month window gets us in a place to where we can really have some good conversations about not only what content are we getting ready to record, but what have we already done? I think too often it's super easy to walk away from a recording and forget about it. For me, but it's nice to know that something that you really enjoyed is about to go live. Like something that just went live, a couple weeks ago was our confidence episode, our boundaries episodes, and that was a two-parter, and that's one of my favorite episodes that we've done of this podcast, and it was a huge favorite for our listeners, and it was a podcast that once again we recorded it didn't show up for like 5 weeks, and to have time to really think about what was coming and to how to put that out to the world, because it's not just about recording the podcast, it's about making sure that you promote the thing that you created. And as a marketer, that's something that's, you think a lot about what you're going to do, you do it, and then you think about how you're going to actually introduce it to the world so that, it has an impact and it doesn't just, die on the vine. So that to me, is an important part, is having a little bit of extra room to think about what you just did so that you know the best way to introduce it to the world. And so that 5-week window is huge. Okay. So I think that's a good, sort of setting the tone. The next thing is, what does a week look like at Serial Progress Seeker in terms of producing the podcast? And just the step by step. And I'm going to start off with my perspective of what happens, but just understand that I know about 10% of everything that goes on with this podcast. I am involved in about 10% of it. And the vast majority of my involvement is here. But the other thing that I'm really, really involved in is when we have our Monday Writers Room. And we started our Writers Room, 2-3 months ago? Like, when did we start Writers Room?
Yeah, I'd say that's about right. Probably about 3 months ago.
Yeah. So probably January. And so we were having a very loose sort of ideas for the podcast meeting. And we decided that we were going to go all in and make sure that we dedicated a full weekly meeting to, seeing what had happened with the podcast, what was going on, what was good, what was bad, but also to take time to actually make sure that, we were putting a ton of time in planning of the content. So every Monday, I show up to a meeting at noon, and it's noon our time. And I show up to a meeting at noon, and we will go over like old stats, on the last podcast. How did it do last week? What was the good? What was the bad? How are our social channels? How's the YouTube doing? How's TikTok doing? How's Facebook, Instagram? How are all those things doing? And then we get into, okay, what are the cool things that we can talk about on a podcast coming up? What are the guests that we possibly have? What are the things that are sort of happening there? Now, this is the perspective that I have. I get to hear this. Ideas get pitched to me. I get to pitch ideas. We get to beat ideas up. That's the perspective I have. But I know there's a lot going on that sort of goes into that. So what I want to ask you guys is, from your perspective, what all is happening Monday, both, from your perspective on that meeting, but what all is happening, that I don't know about on Monday outside of that meeting. And so, I'll let Marshall kind of start with this, what does Monday look like for you surrounding that meeting and then going into that meeting?
Well, I think to start out, the very first thing that I want to do every single Monday when I wake up is analyze the last week. And you touched on it a little bit, but it's going out and pulling our numbers, the number of plays that we're getting, looking into some of those metrics that are there. The retention of an episode, how long is someone listening, where are they coming from, and bringing back highlights to the group to report, because obviously we're all going 100 miles an hour in different directions. So I see that as an opportunity for us to come together and let's talk about what's going well and where can we improve, essentially. Same thing, just like you mentioned too, for the social media. So we had this YouTube short that absolutely kicked ass over the weekend, but then we had this TikTok that sucked on Friday, and we want to talk about why, right? We want to, because what we're trying to do is figure those things out and determine, okay, how do we capitalize on that YouTube short, and then how do we learn from that TikTok, essentially, and stuff like that. So of course we're bringing all of that information in, but then we're also something that's happening behind the scenes for all of us throughout the week is just like we talked about. We're all consuming, so we're watching different videos. We're listening to podcasts. So we're developing ideas through a week. So we use that board essentially our place to go and pen boards. So we use a great tool called Trello to be able to go in to collect our ideas. And I can remember back in the beginning of our discussions, Ben, you said, I want this meeting to go like, imagine you would be sitting in a room at Saturday Night Live. And we all came to the table with all of these ideas that we think would make this week's show kick ass. And I, that's something that stuck with me since the very first time that we talked about this, because it feels like that, right? Like it feels like something that we're all contributing to, because we are all contributors. We do different things. We've got, someone on the team that's handling finances, someone that's doing editing, someone that's doing social media, someone that's producing and stuff, but we're all bringing ideas to the table. And I think that's my favorite, part about that meeting, is the fact that we do get to sit there and kind of batter on ideas and share those things. But then we're also, obviously, we're reviewing our promotional plans for the upcoming week, and constantly just generating ideas. It's just a generation meeting is what it is. We sit there for an hour and we're just pumping through. So it's always it's a really good way for me personally and how I operate to start a week, because I leave that meeting and I know my marching orders. I know the things I need to work on and the things I need to really be focusing on throughout the week. So it's really helpful for me.
Yeah. So for me, Mondays is a lot of consumption day. Like Marshall has just said, it's just going through and looking at what other people are doing. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same niche. It could be different niches, but going through and looking for different types of content, because you never know where an idea is going to spark. There may be something inside that meeting that somebody said that kind of triggers something, makes me think of another topic that we can pull from. So yeah, Monday for me is just a lot of consuming of content and coming up with ideas.
Now, and I should mention this to anybody listening. The writer's room the first month was horrible. I don't mean it was bad. It was better than what we had. I want everybody to understand, like, it was such a more organized thing than what we were doing. But compared to the way the writer's room works now, is like, we had to go through this process of understanding what this meeting should be. Like, we had a plan of what we thought it should be, and we got on, and it was just like, were we actually leaving the meeting with, as much production and as much, marching orders, like Marshall says, is what we needed? And I don't think any of us were, because we didn't know how to run the meeting. And I'm somebody that's run meetings for years, and I think you guys are too. Like, we've all run meetings, we've been a part of meetings, but we didn't know exactly how this would fit for us. The idea was initially, think about, how you'd run a TV show and how you'd write for that, how you do ideas. But we started to figure out there were some inefficiencies with that meeting very, very fast. And kind of what we were very open to in the beginning was, this meeting is not going to be the same meeting in a month or 2 months from now. And everybody was so good about that. Like, everybody was just like, and it was uncomfortable at times. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not going to say that we haven't been through some things where, like, somebody left the meeting and be like, screw Ben, like, screw that guy. Like, how dare he? But I mean, the idea is we were all really open to understanding that we didn't really know exactly what we were doing with that meeting, but that over time we were going to just kind of stomp out the inefficiencies of it. And the only way to do that was just to do it. And I think there was definitely some weeks that we got off that meeting and we're like, did we really get what we needed out of that meeting? But it led us to now. And, like, that's my favorite meeting of the entire week. And it doesn't feel like a meeting. It feels different. For me, it's still a meeting, but it's a meeting where, like, I'm excited to go to, because I get to see what our progress is, and I get to see, like, where we're falling down. And it's something that gets fixed right away. And I will say this: the number one reason the writer's room meeting is the most important part of this podcast is this. Everybody, and I think this is true of every writer's room for every TV show or radio show, anything out there, that when they're done right, they're done this way. Everybody goes into that meeting understanding that if I have a bad idea, or if I'm doing something wrong, quote unquote wrong, whatever that means, if I'm doing something that somebody has an opinion on, and it's maybe a negative opinion of that, it's not a reflection of me as a human. I think that's, if you're doing anything creative with other people and you're in the band and, this is hard, because it's so easy to take things personal when it's an idea that you've had. But I think that our team has been very, very good. And this is the thing I'm the most impressed with us at 100 episodes, is everybody is able to sort of shake off things that maybe they brought something to the table that was not popular. And, we rule by committee a lot. And sometimes something's not popular. And to be able to walk away and to detach that idea from your self-worth, that's what a writer's room's about. You're not going anywhere. And I think that, what I've tried to do, and I don't think I do a great job of it sometimes, is try to create an environment where you're not your last idea. You're the total sum of what you bring to the table ideas wise. And I think everybody on the team brings a lot of really good ideas overall, but you got to be okay with throwing something out there that may not work and that nobody is into. And I think that, that's the environment that we've gotten to, that in the next 6 months, I'd like for us to be even more firmly settled in that, myself included, because it's hard for me sometimes when somebody says that's, nobody will say it to me yet. And so that's why I know we're not 100% there yet. But when I throw something out there and it just kind of gets quiet, that's when I'm like, yeah, okay, that was a shitty idea. So, that's Tabitha. I feel like you had something to say.
Well, yeah, we just both got quiet.
A lot about that says a lot about how the meeting has gone. In the beginning, the meeting was like an hour and a half long, and there was a lot of ideas that were thrown out, a lot of ideas that were thrown away. And now we've gotten to the point where that meeting is maybe 30 minutes. And we've got so many great ideas in there that we're not having to bring as much, because we're now learning from each other and understanding what it is that we're looking for and what's going to make the best podcast. So that meeting's much faster. The ideas are greater and things are moving a lot smoother than they were, even 3-4 months ago.
Well, and I'll say this, the first part of the meeting, and this is probably the big part of when we actually review the stats and we see what is working, that really has fed us. We've learned. And if we weren't going live and doing this without a net every week, we wouldn't be improving, because we wouldn't be getting feedback from the real world. And like I said, we got a long way to go, but like that real time feedback that we get every week at the beginning of that meeting really has shaped us into something that, like you said, it was an hour and a half long, where sometimes we would have some good ideas sneak through, to where every idea that comes through now is good, or is something to build on, because everybody on the team has gotten used to what's supposed to be happening. And everybody's really like locking into, oh, this is what this is. Okay, this is what works. This is who we're actually talking to on the podcast, rather than, oh, maybe we're talking to these 3 different groups. And so I think that that's incredibly important. So that's Monday. Monday, we really get into sort of the planning of what we're going to do on the podcast on Thursday, or 4 Thursdays down the road, right? A lot of times on that podcast, you guys, somebody will bring me something and I say, this is a good idea, but you've got to format it for me in this way, or you've got to write it out this way. And then, the next Monday that'll be brought to me and be like, okay, that's better, but we still have to do this. And, there was a particular episode that we did not too long ago where it was also one of my favorite episodes, where we were sort of talking about the people that you bring into your life, and kind of what the purpose that they play. And it was the themes team. And the beautiful part about that was a concept that we really beat up over a period of a month, maybe longer. And we loved that. We loved that concept from day one. But every time that Marshall would come back to the table with the next version of it, I liked it more. And it was like, and we just kept beating it up until we were like, this is something that is not only, really good for people to listen to and to, internalize and to use in their lives, but this is something that's a little easier to remember because of the way that the content was actually structured. And, I think that's the thing. When you have the window of a month to beat something up with other people, you can turn something from a good idea to what we call world class. Something that really can stand the test of time and is a concept that can take off and go viral. And so that's really the concept behind, that Monday meeting. It's giving us the room to put something out there and have it beat up, but also really take a look and see, what's happening after. So this is where things get a little murky for me. Okay. This is where I'm really going to dive into the questions for you guys is, now after we get into, Monday stuff, I go off and I'm doing other stuff in Serial Progress Seeker. I'm working on, delivering a product that maybe we sold the week before, planning stuff for the software, testing things, and I get real in the weeds with other things. You all are actually making this podcast work. And so as we get into the rest of the week, what starts to happen? So like Tuesday, what's a standard Tuesday look like for you guys as we're producing the podcast?
Yeah, so I refer to Tuesday as outlining day for myself, because what I'm essentially doing is just what we talked about a few minutes ago. I'm taking the marching orders that I just received from that Monday meeting, and I'm going to put them in place, right? So for upcoming episodes, I'm starting to work on outlines. So we had this idea that landed on the writer's room board. We beat it up a little bit, and we decided, okay, this is good enough to go ahead and move on and start outlining. So I'll take those conversations where we've been taking notes for the last several weeks and go and start to develop a strategic outline for an episode and start to set it up potentially, segmented so it's properly kind of laid out for us to be able to come to this together and have kind of a good layout for what we want to talk about. But also we're thinking ahead. We're thinking ahead from a standpoint of how is this going to cut up for clips on YouTube? How are we going to be able to potentially use some of these pieces that we could use on shorts for TikTok or YouTube? And so we're being as strategic as possible while starting to outline the content itself. And then also, because something that we have evolved more and more into is bringing on some of those guests that you were talking about earlier, our friends of the podcast that we've developed over years and years. We want to bring them on and let them share their expertise as well, because we know that's where our audience gets a lot of value. We've seen it happen over and over and over again. So obviously there's some coordination aspects that have to take place from the guest standpoint, whether it be general scheduling, starting to write questionnaires. We send questionnaires to our potential guests, to see kind of some of the things that they would be interested in talking about. We do silly things, but necessary things like image consent forms, so we can start to prepare ourselves to be able to promote them. We send all the recording information. We try to be as absolutely forthright as possible on all the information that a potential guest would need, so that when they click a button on recording day, it's literally that easy. They're clicking a button and they know what to expect, and they know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And then of course there's a communication aspect that happens on the backside too. When you're dealing with guests, you want to let them know when an episode goes live. You want to share some promotional materials with them, and then also trying to get some follow-up information from them to see what their experience was like, see if they have any suggestions for potential other guests going forward, things like that. So for me, that's a big coordinating and outlining day for episodes coming up.
Well, for me, it's going back, and even though I'm on almost all of these episodes, I still go back and listen to and review the old episodes to see what I can pull out for social content. Because just because I'm here listening doesn't mean that I'm thinking in that mind frame. So I have to go back, and sometimes I pull the transcript and just read through it, and sometimes I watch the actual video of us talking and pull content and figure out what's gonna go well on social media based on that episode. And then again, just researching other people's social and seeing what's popular and going on out there.
Yeah. And, I don't know that it always comes off, and I hope it doesn't come off this way. I hope that I hope it feels like we're locked in and engaged and just talking to each other. That's the way it's supposed to feel. But even on an episode that, is as loose and it's me asking questions, I have an outline in front of me. There is a doc in front of me right now that is step by step how this episode should go. We don't do that, so that, we're mechanical. We don't want it to be mechanical, but it is. The social media content on the other end can't be an accident, and if you have an editor that is going in like we do, and you're doing this, Marshall and our editor Ashton, they're constantly pulling things out that can go in places. And you don't want to have to be like, okay, when did Ben say this? Or when did Tabitha or Marshall say this? You want to have an outline. You'd be like, generally it should be right around here because this is where it was in the outline. And so it's not just what we're doing here. It's all the way down to what is going live with social media that week, 5-6 weeks down the road. And did we plan something? What did we think was going to be a good moment? And listen, they've set me up for plenty of good moments that I've completely just botched, by the way. But what do we think is going to be a good moment for social, that would make a good 5-minute YouTube clip, would make a good 1-minute TikTok, would make a good set of social posts that are maybe 5 images that are kind of the step by step, and all that comes from the outline. And it makes everything a lot easier when you sort of look at things that way. And we can still sit here and talk, and it be very natural, but at the same time, that outline tends us this way. There's also one more thing that happens that I forgot that I know about on Tuesday. And I know that this probably gets planned way before Tuesday. But what happens is there's an email that goes out to our list of people that listen to the podcast that sign up for our email list. And, if you go to Serial Progress Seeker right now, there's stuff that we give away. Right now, we're teaching people how to start their podcasts for $150. Like, if you wanted to start a podcast from scratch, just using your smartphone, how would you start a audio/video podcast for under $150? So we know that most of the people that are signing up for that are also listeners of the podcast. They've listened to at least one, right? Because maybe they heard us talking about it. We want to send them a reminder that the latest episode's there. You may think, oh, well, if they listen to you, then they're getting a notification on their phone, blah, blah, blah. We don't sit back and wait. We are actively re-promoting the podcast to people that are interested, or at least have shown an interest in the podcast in the past. So every Tuesday, there's an email that goes out, and I can show you in the stats from the time before that email goes out to 6 hours later, a huge difference in the amount of people that have listened to the podcast. And that email on Tuesday, and there's another email that goes out later in the week. We'll talk about that later and what the difference between the two is. But there's an email that goes out on Tuesday that works. Now, another reason the email goes out on Tuesday is we started to realize that there is a crossover between my promotions. And so Tuesday is typically a day in my promotions where I'm selling products that I'm not emailing. I rarely email on Tuesday just because of my typical promotion cycle. And so Tuesday's a perfect day to make sure that we're getting another touch with people that like our brand. But it's specifically aimed at the podcast. There's not going to be any distraction with other things. And so that's monstrous in our listenership. And the reason it is it's not that people aren't interested enough to remember. It's like people get busy. There's tons of stuff going on in people's lives, and we don't assume that we are ever the number one thing in people's lives, because we're not. And so we have to remind people through various methods, whether that be an SMS message, which, every so often we'll do, or an email message. And we send a couple emails a week to people reminding them, hey, you like us. We got a new episode. Here's what it is. Go check it out. And so, I was sitting there yesterday and I was looking at our numbers, and I just remember oh, we're getting started. And then a couple hours later, I was like, boom, there it is. The email must have gone out. And so that email that goes out on the Tuesday, our episode typically goes live Monday morning. We let it breathe for a little bit. Tuesday, that email goes out. And that is a huge, huge piece of the puzzle that, if we weren't talking about it right now, there's probably a lot of people that wouldn't know that happens. And that is a big part of how we start lighting the fire underneath our pod.
Speaking of that too, I want to make sure we don't get too far down the road before we give the major props that need to be given that's going on throughout the entire week. And that's from the editing standpoint. And I know that you can speak to that probably more because you have a lot of those technical skills from a video and audio editing standpoint. So I'd love for you to kind of input here, but I know that Ashton on our team is just absolutely knocking it out of the ballpark. She is consistently editing from an audio and a video standpoint the full podcast, but then also editing and pulling pieces of clips. She's doing the graphic elements to it. She's doing captions for videos, all of these things. To be honest with you, I've done a few of them myself, and they take some freaking time, and it takes some. It's kind of meticulous work. So it takes, I think, a special kind of person to be able to do the editing job that she does, and I know that you can speak to that.
Well, let me give a bigger compliment than just she's doing the meticulous work for the editing. I picked Ashton to do the editing for our particular podcast because our particular podcast is different than I think most podcasts. And this is what I mean. Our podcast a lot of times has very technical things. very marketing related things. And I actually picked Ashton to be our editor. Ashton, was not what you would call a traditional video editor. She didn't have a lot of background in video editing, and that's the second part of this compliment that I'm going to give her. But the first part is this. Ashton was picked because Ashton has a unique understanding of digital marketing, the topic. Ashton has a unique understanding of what it means to work from home and what that means. Ashton has a very firm grasp that most people on the planet do not have of what it means to be a serial progress seeker. And it's just because she's lived it for a long time. And she's somebody that, I have people that work with me that get it. You all have people that work underneath you that you contract out that get sort of what we're doing, but they don't breathe it. Ashton breathes it, like breathes it. I sent her something. This is a perfect example. I sent her something yesterday that was like this nerdy little marketing thing that I found, and I sent it. And it wasn't just a reply back in Slack. She called me. You're kidding. Like, was excited about it. And that's what she breathes it the same way I breathe it. I would love to be like, I breathe it more than anybody, but like Ashton breathes that level of nerd about the technical and the really, really technical stuff. She really breathes it. What I have found with hiring video editors in the past, because I've done this before, is they don't understand when something comes up that is the hidden magic trick, like the really kind of nerdy stuff. And Ashton gets that. And so she also has probably the best understanding of the brand, maybe even more than me sometimes. And so what I wanted to do is, instead of hiring someone with a lot of video editing experience, I wanted someone that really understood our content to be the final say on the editing. And so here's the second part of the compliment. The first part is just this level of understanding and expertise that she's earned over the years. She earned it. She showed up. The second part is this. This is somebody that I have, and I know probably you guys think that you all take the brunt of this, of me giving you suggestions of the way we should do things. And okay, this was good, this was not good. And I know that like we all have these conversations. I'm like, guys, we need to clean this up, And so I get to sort of be a filter sometimes that I know is annoying. Nobody probably has taken more of that than Ashton, though. And you guys aren't privy to those meetings, but like, the other day I'm like, Ashton, the audio is not a half a decibel down where it needs to be. Like, it's the most annoying thing to hear that from somebody. And, she's taken it like a champ. And so what's happened is I've got this really good expert at what we do and what our brand is about that has consistently, week in, week out, learned more about the video editing side. And, she would be the first person to tell you she's still getting things down, but like the beauty of the way the audio gets edited, the beauty to the way the video gets edited for social that she's doing. If you look at the path over the last 25 episodes, it's unreal what this person has accomplished and where they are. And that's the thing, by the next 25 episodes, where she is, because she's just the speed at which she's learning to do the side that she didn't have a background in is ungodly to me. Like, I couldn't learn it that fast. And so, it's funny. I started out and I did have more expertise with it than her, and I was giving her tips, and now she's far and ahead of me. And she's starting to catch up with people that have been doing this a lot longer than she has. And so, yes, I think that one of the big things that happens, during these days is we've got Ashton in the background that is editing these clips with a firm grasp of the content. That's the most important thing for your podcast. Is it's hard to edit things correctly and to break out clips of things if you don't have a firm grasp of the content, but also to catch the little stuff, that should be there, that shouldn't be there, that doesn't matter, that does matter, that, because a lot of times these podcasts, you guys might not catch it, but there's stuff that's edited in, there's stuff that's edited out to strengthen what's there. And to have really one of the last filters before it gets to live and production to be that person, because we're all filters. I don't get me wrong. Tabitha's a filter, Marshall's a filter, Alicia's a filter. We all filter this stuff, and we're said this should get through, this shouldn't. But to have your last filter, which is your editor, a lot of times, be someone with that firm of a grasp of things is really, really big. And so any of you that are looking to hire somebody to do that kind of stuff, I always tell people, get someone who gets your content and your brand first and send them to video editing school. Now I have plenty of people that will disagree with me on that, and that's okay. There's more than one way to skin a cat. But yes, really having that person in your pocket that is like, and what I mean by in the pocket is it is in the pocket that gets that. That's the idea behind it. And so yeah, a lot of good stuff gets done from the editing side with Ashton, and I can't say enough about what happens there. So yeah.
Yeah, so that's Tuesday. I think we should
That's Tuesday.
Move on to Wednesday, right?
Let's do it.
So I think we should start with Tabitha on this one. Tabitha, what's your typical Wednesday look like? What do you typically focus on a Wednesday?
So my Wednesday and Thursday pretty much looks the same, and it's me creating the graphics for Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, those kind of social platforms. And you may hear about it some on the podcast, but we use something called Carbon Copy, where I can go and get graphics templates that we can use. I can go pop in our images, change some things up and use it for that. And then looking, like I'm always out looking for other things, other ideas and inspiration. So, but a lot of my time Wednesday and Thursday is just spent creating those graphics, taking, if we've got a podcast guest, taking their images that they've sent to us, popping those into the graphics so that we've got something to promote all of those episodes on all of the social media stuff.
Thank goodness for Carbon
Yes.
Copy, right?
Like, makes life easier, faster.
Well, I was thinking, thank goodness for Tabitha, because it wasn't that long ago we didn't have Tabitha focusing on this stuff directly, and now we do. And you could look at our social media accounts; you could kind of see when she took over. It's crazy.
Well, let me qualify that compliment. Carbon Copy, for those of you that don't know, is where we've hired designers to come in and build templates for us that mimic or look like what some of the top producers out there are creating. Tabitha's experience on our team with social media, running social media for other people, running social media for us, led us to what do we build these templates out to in the first place. And so a lot of where the Carbon Copy templates came from were shaped by our social media expert, our social media image expert, which is Tabitha. And so, I got this great sort of, template thing that Tabitha uses all the time. Of course, I use all the time. But it really was built by, over the years. And I maybe Tabitha doesn't even remember all this, but like, I was like, hey guys, who are the people out there that are some of the top social media producers that you follow? And, the largest contributor to that has been Tabitha, of course. And so, a lot of what we send these designers to build us templates that we can use comes from, Tabitha coming in. And so Tabitha, pretty much was a big part of building this. Tabitha, by the way, for those of you that don't know, and why Tabitha is not only a host on this show with a lot of expertise to bring, but somebody that, does social media for us, is Tabitha ran an agency way back, a digital agency that helped small businesses to grow with marketing. And then Tabitha came and helped me do some stuff for a long time where we were helping, exclusively chiropractors with their social media. And we had a whole strategy behind that. And so a lot of expertise that kind of goes into this. But Tuesday or Wednesday and Thursday, a lot of what you see on our Facebook and our Instagram, and it shows up in other places too. Don't get me wrong. When you see like the YouTube covers and things like that, there's an influence there too. But a lot of what you're seeing in terms of the static image content that people dig, that comes from Tabitha. And a lot of that is grueling, going through old content and pulling things. And that's not easy work. That's not easy work to pull that stuff. And I say all that to say this, maybe you may be sitting there and be like, well, how does this apply to me? I think it's important that you understand all the things that get done. Now, we have different people that do them, but it's important that you understand all the things that get done. My goal for doing this 100th episode is not only do you know all the things that get done so you can do them yourself at some level, but when you get to the point where your podcast starts to bring money in and it starts to give you notoriety and you can bring people in, understanding what those people need to do. And so, a big part of the podcast and a big part of our brand is that social media presence. And, I feel like where we have started to land is we're kind of that warm blanket. We're not in your face. We're not trying to get you going on some divisive issue so that we can get your attention. We're the folks that are constantly there preaching this gospel of serial progress seeker. And a big part of that has to do with, hey, the stuff that we say in this call, how does it translate to static stuff? If you're not a place where you can listen to the podcast or watch a video, how do we still touch you? How do we still get that concept and be a positive influence, but also change the way you think? And a lot of that is taking things from these episodes and making sure we pull that. The other side of this, and this is incredibly important, and this is part of what Tabitha does, is making sure that you're looking outside of people in your space, making sure you're looking what other people are doing and bringing good ideas in to, where we are. And Tabitha listens to a lot of stuff and watches a lot of stuff that we don't. I think Marshall and I probably have more similar pastime stuff that we do outside that we watch, and we bring those influences in. Tabitha brings a whole different perspective. And when you see our brand now versus you saw what our brand was, and you could literally go to our Facebook page right now or Instagram, and you could cycle back 6 to 12 months and you can see a stark difference in, what's happening. And like I said, those things get done on like a Wednesday and Thursday. And, that's an important part, which sort of takes us to Thursday. Which is the day which I come back into the consciousness of what's going on here. And I, just so you guys know, I typically get a Slack message. Slack is just how we communicate with each other all week. So we don't have to like hopping on meetings and stuff all week. But I get this message. And in that message is the episode outline. It's the link to, jump into the call and any commercials or any extra audio that we have to do that's outside the confines of sort of this recording. There's typically a script that will be put in front of me. And so like when I wake up Thursday, usually Wednesday to Thursday, I get the scripting of what is going to happen when we actually get on the call. And so this is when it starts to, I get out of whatever else I'm doing and I come back to center for this. And so what's Thursday like for you, Marshall? Like, I know that this has got to be like, okay, I've been planning all week for this and we've got to like bring the heat. And so there's got to be a level of pressure on your end that's not on my end because I just show up and, mess everything up. But what, yeah. So
this is the day of the week where I'm consuming a lot of energy drinks. Just a lot of them. No, it really does. Honestly, if there was a quote unquote show day, this is show day. And that's kind of how I treat it, even from like how I start my morning. So I'll get up and I might get a workout in. And, of course I'm making sure that some things are getting done on the business side, but I'm making sure that my energy is at a certain level. And I think we probably all do this to a certain extent, just because we want to bring everything we have to this specific recording. And this is something, to be honest with you, that doesn't come by naturally for me. Getting on a camera and getting on a microphone and discussing with you guys is not something that just I figured out how to do one day. Like it's something that's been a process and that I've been learning how to do. So I need a little ramp up time. That's me. But I also, beyond just recording these episodes, prior to this, I'll take some time to work on intros for episodes. So we record those separately so we can, put them on later on. So anything that's kind of a video or audio related, you mentioned commercials and stuff like that. Like today is the day to do that stuff. Thursday is the day to do those things. And also, even prior to us getting on and recording, I think something that we've instituted recently that's becoming really beneficial for the episode in general is we get together and we kind of cover things last minute. We go, okay, let's look through this one more time. Let's see if there's any holes. What have we not filled yet? And how do we kind of bring a little extra spice before we hit the record button and start? So Thursday is all about show day. It's recording day. So that's kind of the way I see it.
Another plug for Ashton, because I think this is important. Ashton is our editor for this pod and for the video stuff that comes after. And, if Ashton gets on and hears somebody's mic is doing something funny, or like she's not getting a good quality a good quality video recording of somebody, like the background looks funny. We get on actually before we record for about 30 minutes, and Ashton's with us. Ashton's not with us right now, but Ashton's actually in this room with us. And for those of you that don't know, we use, at least right now, we're using a service called Riverside.fm. And Riverside is something that, kind of is how we get together and we get to have a conversation and get a higher quality of audio and video output just with the way that this service works that we couldn't get when we were trying to do it with like Zoom or GoToWebinar. And so we actually log into Riverside about 30 minutes before. We typically record starting around 2:00 our time. So we record about 2:00 our time, but so about 1:30 our time on a Thursday, we'll get together, Ashton's in the room, and we're testing the mics because sometimes things are different week to week. It happens. My kid will come through and bump the mic. That's not fair to my kid. He never bumps the mic, but I will bump the mic. Okay. I'll be doing something. I'll carry something in the room and I bump the mic and something will change. And so we always get levels. We also try to make sure, and this is, I think, a big one. We try to make sure that we reset the old routers, and that's one of the things that Ashton will remind us to do is, every so often your router gets all crudted up, and a good reset, make sure that your speed is decent. And so we do some of those little things that you wouldn't think about. With a one person podcast, I didn't have to think about that stuff. Just, it was one person, it was my stuff. And if it didn't come out, I made a change on my end. That was it. But when you're coordinating 3 people that live in 3 completely different places, it's important. And like, you look at the background and stuff, and it's like, we have a very similar color scheme. We have, even though there's differences, there is things that, kind of come together to do the same stuff. That is all because, it was very intentional, but also Ashton's honest every week. Hey, this is right. Did you notice that this was going on? And no. And it's having somebody that's not us, which is, when we come in on Thursday, we're very focused on the content. What are we going to talk about? When Ashton comes in, she's thinking about what she's going to get as a product on the other end to edit. And so having that extra person to come in and actually listen in a podcast like this is incredibly important for us because she's thinking about things that we're not thinking about when we come together on a Thursday. So that's that. Now, Friday. we get done with the podcast. All the recordings, individual audio and video are saved in Riverside. So it's not just one big thing. It's like individual audio and video is saved in Riverside. We get to Friday. Our goal, and I think we're getting there. Our goal is to be off Friday. After the week that we put in, I have no interest in anybody on my team working on a Friday because the work is, the work can be done in other spots. I'm not a person that thinks, oh, if we work Friday, we'll get more done. No, that's not the way it works. It's how can you put out an incredibly high quality product and then rest? And rest, I think, is a big part of what, has leveled up our content, leveled up what we do. It's understanding how to rest and to get those, good thoughts in your head and be creative. So Friday we're moving towards that, but I don't think we're quite there yet. So like, what are you guys doing on Friday? That's like, and it's probably a lot of cleanup work. But what are you guys doing on Friday? Because what I do on Friday is I once again leave this space and I'm typically in, what are we doing to get a sale going of a product this weekend? So that's, I leave this and I'm like, okay, we've got this thing that we want to promote. Am I doing a webinar? Am I just sending out emails? What is it that I'm like getting ready so that this thing runs the entire weekend without me having to be there? So I have to write a lot of emails, or I have to make sure an email sequence is ready, and I have to make sure all these pieces of the puzzle. So I kind of leave this. What are you guys doing on Friday?
So for me, I am scheduling all the content for the upcoming week. I'm taking all of those still graphics that I've created. I am using platforms to go in there and schedule that for Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, all those different social platforms, but getting not just the static images, but the captions that go with it and all the hashtags and all the stuff, and getting that programmed so that it's going out for the upcoming week. And I don't have to worry about it I can work on creating new stuff. I don't have to worry about scheduling stuff. So.
Yeah, it's kind of the same for me. It's I wrote down that Friday is kind of scheduled to publish day, but essentially what it really is, it's kind of automation day for us, right? This is where we actually put the automations to work for us. And so something we do on Friday is we schedule the episode that's going to go live on Monday. You mentioned it goes live on Monday morning. It goes live at 5 a.m. My ass ain't getting up at 5 a.m. I'm not going to get up at 5 a.m. and click that button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to schedule it on Friday to go live at 5 a.m. on Monday, so that it hits people's inbox, it hits their phones, it hits their their subscriptions for Apple or Spotify, whatever it is, and they get that notification that, hey, you got a new episode live. Also doing some of the same thing Tabitha mentioned, scheduling content for YouTube for the upcoming weekend so that it can run through the entire weekend. Something that we wanted to make sure to mention too is, this is something, scheduling for these specific elements, especially like YouTube and TikTok. We're doing that daily. And the reason we do that daily is because we want to make sure to analyze everything that goes out. And so from a YouTube standpoint, I'll schedule something for Thursday night, but I don't want to schedule Friday's post yet, because I might learn something from that post on Thursday night that I want to make sure to put towards Friday. And it's kind of a daily thing for that. I literally have a thing on my calendar that says, hey, did you post the YouTube video for today? Because I want to make sure to analyze yesterday's to get better and better all the time. And then, of course, just like you said, you're kind of cleaning up the mess from the week, anything that kind of fell through the cracks that you didn't get to quite taken care of, whether it's outlining or coordinating with guests or, identifying clips to be able to use towards social media, things like that. So it's a little bit of scheduling and setting things up, but it's also just kind of cleaning up the week so that you can start Monday and just pick the ball up and start the whole cycle again.
I love it. Well, here we are. We're at 100 episodes, and drastic change from episode 1 to now. In terms of the way we deliver content, the way that we use the content that we create, for this podcast in lots of other places, social media, things like that. From just, how we're looking to monetize this whole thing. And, that's the thing. I think a lot of people kind of get in that mode of, okay, well, what's the point? What's the monetization? Well, number one, right out of the gate, I sell more products that I'm already selling if this podcast exists. This is something that when somebody listens to this podcast and they like it, they want more. That's a simple equation for me. When somebody listens to this podcast and they're actually getting, if what we're giving away here is that good, then what is the free? If the free's there, what is the paid thing that they're doing, or what other things do they offer? And I'm really big on, understanding that is a big thing. The other thing I want to get across to people is, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, it doesn't have to be this elaborate to start. Ours wasn't, and it still has worked. You also don't have to have a lot of listeners to do some really good things. One of my favorite things about this podcast early on, and even to this day, is I get through a lot of doors that I wouldn't normally get through because this podcast exists. I can get access to a lot of people and a lot of things that I wouldn't normally just be able to get access to because this podcast exists. And this podcast is something that not only, yes, because we have listeners, we can monetize, by selling things to our listeners or recommending things to our listeners who trust us because they know we wouldn't recommend something that wasn't good. But also, when people see this podcast and what we're doing with it, it puts them in a place that it puts us at a level business-wise that they understand that we're playing on a different level. And so it does get us through a lot of doors, just because people are like, oh, well, yeah. The number one thing I hear all the time is people will come up to me and they say, Ben, you guys are really doing it, man. You guys have always done it, but you're really doing it now. Like, I see you on my feed all the time, and I'm like, I ain't doing any of that. So good. I'm like, I was doing it all before when you were like, you were kind of doing it then, but I ain't doing it at all now. Like, this is me showing up, 2 hours a week is what I show up. And the 2 hours a week that I show up with the team that we've got and all the things that you guys just heard about, that is how our social media has exploded too. And, that's the thing, the amount of feeds, it's not about likes for me. I could care less about likes. It's about the amount of feeds that I show up in. And when somebody finds me for the first time, or finds, the Serial Progress Seeker pod for the first time, and they look down that feed, we are sending the right message. And so, there is never an event that I go to. There is never a new potential client that I don't talk to, or a new potential customer who buys our courses or software that I can't point them to one of our social media pages or the website, the Serial Progress Seeker website, or the podcast, that they don't understand very quickly that we are playing at a high level. And that turns into a lot of business for us. And so I don't want anybody that's just starting out right now thinking, I don't have a team, I don't have any of this. You don't have to have all of this figured out yet. Just by doing a podcast and saying, I'm going to go right now, my only goal is I want to talk about this one thing, and I want to go from episode 1 to episode 10. And I want to improve every episode as I go to episode 10. Just having those 10 episodes in place and getting there is going to make you better, but it's also going to put you ahead of most people that are doing this. It's not just some podcast that went and died. If you can start getting something out consistently, it puts you in a position that you can leverage it. I can't tell you how many people that I have turned into clients over the years, you guys, like in my digital agency, because I had them as a podcast guest. That was it. That was our introduction. It was like we really got to know each other on the podcast, or not even that they were on the podcast. They listened to one episode. That was the thing that spawned them to message me on Facebook, and we started talking, and it turned into money, not only for me, but for them. And so it doesn't have to be huge in terms of numbers. And that's the thing. Where we are now is not where we were a long time ago. And I remember I was getting benefit out of our podcast from pretty much the first 10 episodes. And so if you're thinking about starting, start. We're here to help. And like I said, that's why, we've got the thing on Serial Progress Seekers, how to start your podcast for $150. Go download that. I mean, that will give you the equipment list of things that you need to start. It's not expensive. And this is the weirdest way to up the perceived level of where your business is at, without having to do a whole lot. And as I said, we just revealed what we're doing at 100 episodes, but just start. And like I did, it wasn't consistent. It wasn't the greatest, but I just started. And because I just started, I found a way to get all of this put together. And I'm, you guys don't know me like maybe Tabitha and Marshall do, but I'm just some guy. I'm nothing special. I'm just some guy that wanted to do something a little bit more. And when you're doing something that you're passionate about, especially if you have a podcast to promote it, like what we do, and to really have a scheduled talk about it, people will buy into that enthusiasm. And I think that's the biggest thing, is like, this is sort of my way to really show how enthusiastic I am about stuff and how much I believe in it, and really how much I do know about it at this point, and how much you guys know about it. And it opens up a lot of doors. So, I didn't want to have the last say this time. So I just got my last say out of the way. I want to hear from you two before we stop this pod at 100 episodes. What does the podcast and the brand Serial Progress Seeker mean to you? And let's start with Marshall, and then we'll give Tabitha the last word. So Marshall, what does Serial Progress Seeker right now at 100 episodes? It'll change, but what does it mean to you? What does this podcast mean to you? And what are you excited about?
I tell you, what it's meant to me is the amount that I've learned through this entire process has just been, infinite. Doesn't even cover it, to be honest. It's from the episode that I first got to jump on with you, and we were talking about a music festival that we went to now. It's the amount that I have learned in that amount of time. It could fill the freaking Mississippi River that I live next to. It's that's what's exciting, to be honest. That's what kind of fuels me. It's like every day and just like I was talking about a few minutes ago when we were watching these YouTube videos and seeing how we can improve the next one. That's how I feel like every single episode that we come and get together is we then go back on the back end. Our whole team kind of looks at it, listens to it together, and we go, you know what? This was good, but we can do this and make this little change. And it's like every single episode that the level just raises. And that's what's really exciting to me. I'm looking forward to when we can get in this same room, and record episode 200 and go, you know what? Let's compare this to episode 100. It's going to be light years. I know it is, just because of the amount that we are improving and the amount that we're learning every single day it's really exciting.
I would agree with a lot of that. And the fact that we get to come in here and just give people hope for changing how they live their lives and how they're doing things in their lives, to be able to do things on their own term and give them blueprints on how to do that for different scenarios, and not just work and not just business, but everyday life, your relationships and different things that are going on in your life. So it's not just about business. It's not just about work. It's just being a better human being. And I love being able to be here and help people just take their lives up to the next step, just level up on every aspect. And that's the one thing I love the most about coming in here with you guys and being able to share that with everyone.
Love it. Well, happy 100th to you guys. Clap for you all, and for everybody that's listened to us over the years, that's been with us thus far. I can promise you, because I know what's coming up. I have an inside look as to what's coming up. You've not seen anything yet, and the things we've got planned for you guys on the episodes after 100 are going to be big. And the next 25 or so, watch out. I'm sure we'll have great stuff after that, but the next 25 or so, I already kind of have a roadmap of where these are going. Not just from the planning sessions, but just where I am kind of seeing everything start to settle. And, I want to make sure that you understand that you've not seen anything yet. And we're excited about it. So thanks for listening, and make sure you hit that subscribe button. We want to be a part of your life every single week. And whether it's, on the way to work or whatever you're doing right now, if you're in the gym, however you listen to us, we're just pleased that we get to be a part of that section of your life, and we're excited to bring more good stuff to you. So thanks for listening, and I can't wait to see what comes in the next 100 episodes.
Thanks so much for checking out this episode of the Serial Progress Seeker podcast. If you want to listen to more episodes, learn more about our mission, or send us questions or feedback about the show, go to serialprogressseeker.com. You can help the mission by subscribing, reviewing, rating, and commenting wherever you listen to or watch podcasts. And be sure to connect with us on social media for all the latest through Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. We'll catch you next time, Serial Progress Seekers.